Okay, welcome everybody to another installment of our Voices, Visions, and Advocacy series. This one is very special to us in part because we are co-sponsoring this with SWS, which is the Sociologists for Women in Society. We want to give a huge thank you to all the work that they've done through their outreach and planning, particularly Dr. Barrett Katuna, who's been very much part of this whole process with us, trying to figure out the issues that would be most important to talk about today as we try to support mother scholars who are also graduate students. So today we are going to be talking about making the invisible visible, basically. We talked a lot about the fact of sort of how pregnancy and child caring duties are cloaked and kind of kept behind closed doors, particularly at the university level and graduate school level, I should say, and how that impacts women who are going through that process and what it means in terms of getting the supports that are needed. So nearly every mother scholar who has been through graduate school has her own story of woe. I think the women here can likely say the same. And those at SWS and IAMAS want to be instrumental in changing the culture and policies in place at universities so that mother scholars are supported as students and as faculty. This will not be easy, of course. One of the key problems is that it is often verboten to even discuss pregnancy and childcare as being barriers to success. Today's talk will focus on the problems that have often been hidden from view. While we will talk about ways to upend the problems we highlight today, the second talk is where we intend to take a much deeper dive into remediating broken systems. So please know that if you are in the audience, we very much encourage you to take part in what we're saying, either by sharing stories or asking questions. That can be done via the chat box or in the Q&A option, which if you're on your computer screen is just along the bottom. It's one of the options that will be available to you. Sometimes if you're on a phone, you might have to hit the more button and that will come up. But we'll be monitoring both the Q&A section and the chat box. So whichever works best for you will be fine by us. So the first part of this, we're going to go through and introduce those that are on the panel today and let them introduce themselves, as I often feel they do a much better job than I do. And then we'll circle back again to each person, and I will be asking a few questions that we felt targeted some of the key issues that a lot of people might have questions about. But throughout that, if there's something that anybody in the audience wants to chime in on, feel free. Once we wrap up having each person sort of share their research and their ideas and viewpoints on some of this, we'll have it be a more open conversation where folks can talk to one another. If you have questions for a specific panelist, you're welcome to chime in or just ask questions that we can address more wholly. I also have additional questions that I've been thinking about the past few days of, how we could target the or kind of pinpoint some of the key issues that graduate students might want to be asking about. But we very much want this to be engaging and something that's useful to the people that are here today. So with no further ado, I'm going to actually start off with Summer, who's going to be co-hosting this with me, and let her start us off.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Summer Cunningham. I'm an assistant professor in communication at SUNY Oneonta State University of New York. And I did pretty much all of my college career as a single parent and ended up basically doing doctoral research in that area, not because it was what I had intended to, but because it was the reality of my life, and it was the way to kind of balance the pursuit of the degree and parenting. So a lot of that work was about making motherhood visible, making the experience of single mothers, and particularly single mothers in academia, more visible. So my work is pretty experimental and performative, but I'm really interested in this conversation and figuring out how we can make some much needed changes in the academy for mothers, particularly mothers in graduate school, who I think are definitely more vulnerable and have even less support than people who might be in other positions. So glad to be here with you today. Thanks.
Thank you, Summer. And I know you'll bring all of this experience to bear today in helping shape our conversation. Thank you. Next is Dr. Annie McGlynn-Wright.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together and for having me. I'm a NSF postdoctoral fellow at Tulane University. I am also a birth doula, and I focus on providing services to graduate and undergraduate students. And I'm a parent to 2 children, both of whom I had in graduate school, one right before I finished my master's, and then the other, I was 8.5 months pregnant when I took my comprehensive exams. So I had that one too. My research focuses to a large extent on how ideas about pregnancy, race, and class form policy in the United States. And having received the WIC program when I was a graduate student, I became really interested in focusing specifically on these federal assistance programs. That is a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Adina Knapp.
Hi, I'm happy to be here with you all. And this is a really important topic that I think our current pandemic has only put a greater spotlight on, right? Caretaking and health issues while navigating a changing working landscape and living landscape. So I'm a professor of sociology and chair of the sociology department at California Lutheran University, which is a small liberal arts college about halfway between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. And I am a medical sociologist who's always focused on stigmatizing sexual and reproductive health issues. Myself, as a grad student, I was not a parent yet, but I had many, many friends at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I earned my PhD, go through pregnancy, childbirth, navigating newborn care while they were grad students. I myself went through my whole first year in my current position, pregnant, gave birth about a week after commencement of my first year. So I navigated a pre-tenure track pregnancy, which is not quite the same, but it has its different challenges. And in my particular pregnancy, I ended up with some pretty severe childbearing injuries, which required actual surgery about a year after I gave birth to fully remedy. And so that brought me to my current research topic, where I've joined forces with Christine Morton, who's another medical sociologist at Stanford Medical School. And we've interviewed over 40 women who had these types of childbearing issues that kind of gave them an unexpected twist and turn to navigating postpartum life. And we just finished a study with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, looking at issues, similar issues facing women there. So while I haven't specifically studied grad students' experiences, the folks we've interviewed come from a wide range of socioeconomic status, power, and privilege backgrounds and different identities. And so I'm excited to kind of bring some of that here today to talk about with the grad student population.
Thanks so much. And last but certainly not least, we have Aksana Moraz.
Hi, everyone. Really honored to be part of this panel today. My name is Aksana Moraz, and I'm originally from Ukraine. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I am a mother to a 3.5-year-old and, as of yesterday, 8 months old. I had them both actually. My firstborn was after I finished my Fulbright scholarship, as I was a master's student on Fulbright, and then I had my second, obviously, in 2020 during COVID pandemic. So I will be talking about those experiences as well. I was a teaching associate, but because of the retrenchment that happened at IUP recently, now I am completely unemployed. So I'm focusing on my dissertation, which is first, it started not being part of like my identity of a mother, but it turned to be one as during the COVID, I decided that I want to include a chapter on my identity of a mother and how it relates to my digital identity, because I'm actually researching digital identities of multilingual students. So that also became a part of my dissertation work, and I'll be talking more about that today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. As you can tell, we have a variety of experiences and kind of trajectories that people have taken. So I'm very excited to see that we can address hopefully a wide gamut of kind of experiences and potential issues that people are facing. So we're going to go back to Dr. Annie McGlynn-Wright for our first set of questions here. And one of the questions that I had for you is that a lot of our work, a lot of your work, I should say, centers on race and class inequities, particularly those systemic issues that impact pregnant bodies. So in what ways do you think graduate students are impacted by the issues that you study? And where do you see class and race tying into that?
That's a great question. I think that when we're talking about these institutions of higher education, what we find is that these institutions were set up with a really particular graduate student in mind. And that graduate student tends to be white, cis man, who is relatively financially secure, or comes from a family background where they're relatively financially secure. And it's not really set up to deal with students of color, students from lower income backgrounds, definitely not set up to deal with pregnant students and the issues that might arise during pregnancy. And so from my own experience as well, what I found in navigating higher education as someone who was pregnant and then gave birth was that there's this thing that you have to do if a institution hasn't been proactive in thinking about how their policies might be disadvantageous, right? And that's that you have to do a lot of self-advocacy. And it's a thin line between feeling like you're advocating and you don't want to be the squeaky wheel, right? Like, so these are the professors and the colleagues that you're going to need to rely on in the future for letters of recommendation. So like, there's a point in which you're like, I need to advocate for myself and I need to advocate for the people coming behind me who might be in a similar position. And I think that that burden really disproportionately falls on people who don't fit the mold of what graduate school was created around. So that's certainly one way. And a policy, for example, that I ran into, I did my graduate program at the University of Washington. And I had taken a year of maternal leave when I had my children. And we had 5 years of guaranteed funding. And there was no way at the time that the department was accounting for a year of leave. And so when they would go in to meet about like who gets priority for funding for the coming year, I was being grouped into the cohort that I came into without a real acknowledgement of the time that I took off. And so that was one of the things that I addressed and that they changed during the time that I was there. But no woman had been pregnant in my department as a graduate student in the last like 7 years before me. And so it wasn't something that had really been raised before that point. So yeah, I think that graduate students are asked to bear a lot of responsibility in doing some of that advocacy work. So that's the first one. The second piece is that graduate students who experience pregnancy and are on their stipends, depending on what their own financial situation is, but often experience heading into like near poverty status, especially during that pregnancy period. And we all know that like in the United States in particular, there are lots of feelings about people who are at lower incomes having children, a lot of negative stereotypes about having children when you're not making, when you have to rely on federal assistance programs. So I think graduate students face that sort of stereotyping and that stigma. But I also think there's the secondary stigma that graduate students face, particularly if they're having a family, which is that there's something that this says, I think, within our institution set up the way that it is about, well, you're not really taking this seriously, right? Can you be a serious graduate student scholar and also have children? And I think the feeling that I always had was that it was really hard to show that I was committed to graduate school and also that I'm having a family and that I'm pregnant as well. So I think that that's a real thin line as well that graduate students have to walk.
One of the things that you said there sort of hit a nerve for me anyway, and that was that sort of line between self-advocacy and being the squeaky wheel. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, how students graduate students might navigate some of that when they're interacting with mentors and faculty and even others at their university?
Yeah, I think that having at least one person in the faculty that understands what's happening and can advocate. I know Dr. Alexis Harris was that person for me when I was at the University of Washington. She was very incredibly supportive and was willing to kind of address when I said something about the policies to her specifically, because we had a relationship in which I could do that. She was willing to address those issues as they came up, so I didn't feel like I had to do it all on my own. I do think too, after I had my first child, and then there was like a little cohort of people who ended up having children like shortly after me, and it felt much better to have a group of people that you could kind of bounce things off of. So it was like, oh, have you noticed this? Yes. So you could share some of that burden and share some of those resources as you went along. So I think a faculty mentor that will really go to bat, and also having other graduate students that are willing to share some of that self-advocacy piece too.
So staying on this sort of thread of advocating, my second question is that one of the concerns I have when it comes to advocating for mother scholars is that many outside of academia consider graduate students part of the privileged class, exactly what you were describing earlier, sorts of cis male, semi-privileged financially, all of those, has the social capital, has the family background to continue offering support when needed, et cetera. In what ways do you think privilege impacts the ways that university and communities outside academia treat issues of pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood? So it's just sort of, I think you addressed that a little bit, but if you wanted to extend some of your ideas on that.
Yeah, because I focus on federal assistance programs, one of the pieces that's often incorporated into federal assistance programs is that students are not eligible for them, or the eligibility for students is really incredibly limited and makes it almost impossible for graduate students to access them. And I think part of that comes from, like a real orientation towards work, and you should be working as much as you possibly can in order to demonstrate that you need these programs. That's part of it. But I think the other part of it is really this idea that people who are in the position to go to graduate school, even if they're taking out tons of loans to do it, are privileged and have a lot of privilege. And I think you even see that actually in some of the language that Joe Biden has used around forgiving student loan forgiveness, about like, well, you can't forgive loans that came from like these particular universities, right? The idea that there's this really particular person that attends those universities. So I think that's a problem on the outside of academia, but inside of academia, I do think this is starting to change, but I've just been in way too many conversations where I have heard tenure track professors who have been at universities for a while, like talking very positively about this struggle of graduate school that was a really great time when you didn't have any responsibilities, and it was a little bit of a struggle, but it was okay, this like kind of the good old days, and our graduate students should just buck up and like, make it through. We all did. So I think this idea also exists within academia that like, oh, we have a really particular idea, not only about who our students are and the kind of financial struggles that they might be experiencing, but also this kind of assumption that on the end of this graduate school program are tenure track, well-paid positions, right? Just awaiting people. And it's seen as this really temporary moment of not having a lot of resources, when in fact, more and more it's becoming that, great jobs after graduate school are not necessarily the thing that's happening. So yeah, that's one way. So I think it's both inside and outside of the academy that you see that coming up.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that carries through in terms of those working in adjunct positions too, of that sort of, oh, well, if you're working as an adjunct, this is just temporary sort of thing, maybe you just had a rough year, but next year, of course, you're going to be, that's sort of, because it happened for so many people that are a little bit older or more senior now. And that's clearly not what we're looking at for the sort of this cohort and this generation of students coming through. So thank you for bringing that up. So the next person that we're talking to is Dr. Adina Nick. And the question that I have for you may be something in terms of content that those in the audience may feel uncomfortable with, because we will be talking about some of the, Adina actually provided great language here, so I'm going to steal her language. So one of the heavier issues we'll be talking about are how to navigate serious medical issues that can result from pregnancy or from giving birth. Our speakers intend to be helpful and not to cause distress, but if you'd like to bypass this part of the conversation, then please let us know the best way to alert you that the topic has moved forward. So that may be a place that you want to use the chat box for, if you want to put us on silence, and then you can ask for a wave or some sort of communication so that we can welcome you back when we get on to. None of these subjects I would say are lighthearted, but may not be as distressing as this next short portion. So Adina, most of us go into pregnancy expecting and planning for everything to go well. What are some of the ways in which pregnant graduate students can prepare for the unexpected when it comes to their own perinatal health?
Yeah, and I promise, unless it comes up in Q&A, I will keep graphic details to myself. But as a medical sociologist, I always hesitate to make anyone responsible for their own health outcomes, especially grad students who, as you've talked about with Annie just now, are really grappling with a lot of lack of power and privilege in their position. But in my current research collaborations, we found a few things to be helpful. So I'll put those out there. So this is kind of a positive spin, as it were. I know Annie mentioned being a doula, and I have become such a fan of doulas in my own experience and in doing this work. And I know that hiring a professional doula may not be possible for grad students. So I also want to put out there, I myself served as a lay doula for a friend of mine who is having her second C-section. And so I just encourage you all, if you're expecting or planning to become pregnant, to really look into your doula options, because as the person giving birth, having an advocate for your health during that labor and delivery process is so important and really can make a huge positive difference. The second thing I'd say is that arrange, if possible, for family and friends to provide support to care for you and for your newborn in case you're not able to kind of instantly transition into caretaker role, depending on what goes on for you. And I think, this is where, talk about grad students supporting each other, friends of pregnant people can really help to kind of lay this foundation for folks. I know it's common to provide meals, but sometimes people don't think oh, what they really might need is somebody to babysit the toddler while they're recovering from giving birth to their new one. So kind of thinking a little bit outside the box of that kind of postpartum support that we can provide for each other. And then, again, if this is your, if you already are in a caretaking position, then you have not only a newborn yourself to take care of and perhaps another child or another family member, again, to kind of think about how can I bolster my support ahead of time so that in case I'm not just having the perfect childbirth outcome, I'm still supported in my recovery. For those of us who plan to breastfeed, I think it's, again, my research has found it's really important to have a plan B. I myself feel privileged that I was able to breastfeed, but a lot of the women I interviewed, they had to go on antibiotics because of what happened to them, or their strength was really drained in the first, weeks. And they kind of, they had internalized such a stigma against bottle feeding. And so I want to say we can do both, right? You want healthy pregnant person, healthy childbearing person, and a healthy baby. And if that means that breastfeeding is not the only mode of feeding, I think we need to kind of plan for that. And similarly, I think a lot of us in academia aspire for vaginal deliveries, aspire for less interventions, try to be that educated patient, but really great idea to educate yourself about C-section deliveries just in case the unexpected happens. You're not caught so off guard, and So those would be kind of my top answers to that question.
So then looking, in terms of post-birth with some of that, what do you see as being some of the challenges that, not even necessarily thinking of the extreme situations, but just, I remember like I was not prepared for the fact that I wasn't going to be able to go up and downstairs, and those sorts of things. So I mean, what are some of the, and then how to navigate some of the extensions that I needed, and those sorts of just basics. What are some of the things that you would want to put on somebody's radar as issues to sort of think through or be prepared to face?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, sometimes it could be that you're not going to be able to climb stairs so easily. So if you have a 2-story place, you might need to really think about, can we get a bed into that first floor? Sometimes a lot of grad students especially have, kind of roommate or multifamily situations that they're navigating just due to cost of living issues. And so maybe thinking about, how do we divide up our space, or how do we manage kind of privacy when somebody may be, having to do late night feedings or needing some medical assistance at kind of strange hours. So I think kind of thinking along those lines of privacy and respect, but and then transportation. I think this is also a big key. I know a lot of grad students, we try to forego, kind of try to walk or use public transportation to get everywhere. And if you need follow-up appointments that you weren't expecting, again, that's another way that family and friends could really be supportive, is to offer rides. Like maybe because of the medication you're on or the recovery you're going through, it's not safe for you to drive. So all of a sudden you need some support, whether it's Uber or Lyft or an actual family member helping you. So that's what comes to mind for that question.
Right. And then the other question I had for you is, what ways can the norms, practices, and policies of academia better support graduate students and faculty who experience serious medical issues while pregnant, while giving birth, and during postpartum recovery?
Yeah, and those three time periods are really important, because I think we don't often as a society discuss, gestational diabetes or other issues that especially can come up in the latter months of a pregnancy. So that we always think, oh, well, you're just going to go on leave, when you go to give birth. Well, maybe, but maybe you need some actual support before that. So I think in terms of norms, we need to really destigmatize these perinatal medical issues. Challenging health outcomes happen, and too many of us who end up ill or injured from pregnancy or childbirth, we really blame ourselves for not having done something right, or not having educated ourselves or communicated better with practitioners. I see that a lot in the highly educated folks I ended up interviewing. They really felt like they had done something wrong to end up in this situation. And I think another normative change back to the academic setting is how supervisors, whether it's a faculty advisor or HR, how they're communicating with pregnant graduate students. I think those folks need to better clarify that there is flexibility when it comes to potential health challenges and when it comes to recovering postpartum. So this idea, again, that there's a one-size-fits-all, pregnancy leave policy, I think really needs to be re-examined. And then, so that gets into offering potentially flexible or longer leaves, and maybe more flexibility prior to giving birth. Like if somebody ends up on bed rest for the last month or two, how can they navigate that? And I think, and then again, if you need to recover from childbearing injuries, infection, or illness, how do we get more flexible? A lot of policies I see assume that a vaginal delivery requires less recovery time than a C-section. There's still a lot of, I would call it, outdated, medically inaccurate language around that, kind of like, even with like going on disability leave, they'll often say like, well, you are entitled to this if you had this type of delivery, but not if you had this. And it's, again, discounting the wide range of medical outcomes. And I will say that, understandably, my research has found that mental health can also have a big impact with this. So I think universities really need to offer or clarify that there are mental health care services with providers who are educated about these perinatal health issues. Again, I think it's that old model of who's a student and who's a faculty member, to say that we're going to have folks on campus who don't assume that pregnancy and childbearing are part of our experiences as grad students. And then finally, I would just say, if a campus has an early childhood center, then I'd like to see more development of short-term care options, so that if somebody needs help caring for toddlers or preschool-age children while they're recovering from an unexpected perinatal medical issue, they have that opportunity, kind of right there on their campus. So those are the kind of the top things that come to mind right now.
And that brings up an interesting question in terms of, I knew several people in my cohort that did have issues with postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and those sorts of issues. And I think that going back to when Annie was mentioning about self-advocacy, I think sometimes that can fall into a different category than sort of these physical health needs, such as, I had this and this happen during a C-section, therefore I need X number of weeks off. Whereas you don't always have that sort of timetable when you're dealing with mental health issues. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk just a bit more about how students might be able to advocate for themselves if that becomes an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, there's not a great public discussion. That's why I'm so happy to be part of this panel today. I think we really need to have more honest discussions about, the challenges of pregnancy and childbearing, so that we can normalize the fact that somebody might need extra mental health support. And I guess, so I'll say, the scariest thing I'll say in terms of heavy issues is, I've definitely interviewed a number of folks who truly almost died giving birth. And I think those stories are making the headlines a little bit more, at least before the pandemic, they were starting to really become part of our national conversation. And if somebody has experienced a near-death experience, they might actually have some level of PTSD. They might really need some intensive work, because while people just kind of want to celebrate, oh, here's your baby and aren't you so excited? It's like, yes, and I'm still processing either kind of a loss of ability, a loss of health, or, concern for my actual life. And so I think developing a language of comfort, support groups. I know my campus, after I had become a parent already, kind of established a faculty staff parenting support group that just kind of met together at certain lunches. And so I think kind of creating those spaces, and this reflects on something Annie mentioned too, right? Finding those folks who can really create a safe space to have an uncomfortable conversation. And then as a tenured full professor, I definitely put the onus on myself in terms of power and privilege, that whenever I'm part of a search committee, regardless of the sex, gender identity, or parenting status of the person who's interviewing for a job, I'll always mention all of our parenting, childbearing related policies and benefits, because I think, again, we don't want to fall into the trap of assuming that we know who's experiencing which of these issues. So, yeah.
Which I think is such a critical point, and one we're actually going to hopefully return to when we reconvene as the full panel. So Aksana, you're in our privileged position of being part of a graduate student cohort yourself, and being a mother scholar yourself, and also the distinguished privilege of being a Fulbright scholar. So I know that we had talked a little bit about your experiences through that program and through graduate school, and I was wondering what you could relate to others in terms of, particularly some of the folks here are faculty members that are hoping to hear from folks that are in your position of kind of what are you seeing and living that they may not know about?
Sure. So first of all, yes, as we mentioned, I was a Fulbright scholar, and that was the main reason how I became, here at IUP. And something that I didn't know at the time, and I never read it in any policies, is that, it goes without saying that you're not supposed to get pregnant when you're on Fulbright scholarship, because as Annie was mentioning, it has that financial burden that when you have extra dependent and you're on a scholarship, you might not be able to provide for the child while you're also studying. So in my case, I was finished with my Fulbright scholarship, though I was on what they call post-degree academic training. So a year after I was working. And at that time, I became pregnant with my first child. And funny enough, I sent my Fulbright liaison a Christmas card with my daughter on it. And as soon as she saw that Christmas card, she got back to me saying, "Oh, I didn't know you had a child. You were supposed to report it to us while you were still pregnant. Because if you didn't have enough money, you would have to go back to your country. You would have to stop your grant, go give birth at your home country, and then maybe come back to finish your Fulbright scholarship." So, and I was like, first of all, I already was done with my Fulbright. I was on, post-degree academic training, though they had me to fill out this huge form where I had to itemize all of the financial support I have by, itemize every item I had to buy for the baby for the next period that I was supposed to stay in US. And at that time, it was like 6 more months that I had to do that. Honestly, when I received that, I was shocked. I never felt that, I felt privileged that I was part of Fulbright, such a great scholarship. But at that time, I felt so marginalized that, giving birth and being a mother, yes, it's also a privilege. But at the same time, why are they requiring me to do that? Isn't that my right to have a child? And of course, who knows how much I struggled to have a child and all of that. So definitely, I became such a I started to almost hate Fulbright after that because it was going on and on. This person from Fulbright side was emailing me almost every month asking, how much money do you still have left? It was crazy. So, after that was done and I decided to study for a PhD program on my own, not with Fulbright anymore. So that story kind of ended. I started to also go into a grad student, and as an international student, I found myself with a lot of challenges in terms of how I position myself as a grad student and a mother. I had not a very good experience with having classmates who were not, they had some mental issues with, seeing kids on campus and at events. So at some point I had to actually stay at home with my child because I wouldn't be able to take her to a class, if anything, because this one classmate had some actually problem with having children in class and even at events that were not academic events on campus. So there was this whole conversation between the chair of the department and HR, who gets to go to what events. Either it's a grad student or a grad student with the child. And so we came to a consensus when it's not an academic, like if it's a class, then I would not bring the child because that person had the privilege to, get academic support. And then when it's some kind of an event that is on campus, but it's more, geared toward the community, I would be able to come because I needed my child to be with me because I didn't have anybody to watch over her. So again, this was also something that I didn't expect. And of course, I do understand that, that person had her mental issues with me having a child. But I kind of still, to me at that time, I couldn't wrap my head around that this thing can happen to me. Another big issue that actually was on campus is that something that, again, Annie was talking about, like federal support, is that when my daughter was born and because of the coursework, of course, I wanted her to be in daycare so I could spend time reading and going to classes. When I went to the child services on campus, there here at IUP, they have this, it's called CC Campus, I believe, the program where they get some federal funding for student parents to place their children into the daycare services. But again, I was told that, first of all, there is a very long wait list and they do have preference for undergrad students. So because I'm a grad student, I cannot qualify for that, but even more because I'm an international student, I cannot qualify for it twice. So that was also a big challenge. So I had to find some people to help me out. So in terms of the support, though, I do think that the main thing is to have those allies. Maybe you have the professor who also is a parent. I was lucky enough, my head of the department, the program director, she's a very supportive person. And of course, she was helping me a lot to kind of navigate all of those challenges. But again, you know, after I was done with coursework in my PhD program, and I applied to be a teaching associate, and at that time, and it was again last year in March, so that's when the pandemic started. I got to know that I'm pregnant with my second child, and I think because of the pandemic, but also because of my fear that, again, I'm an international student, and I don't know how the the administration would react to me being pregnant. I had to go on campus because we had this high flex modality of instruction where I had to be in face-to-face classes, but also lead the Zoom classes as well. So I didn't know, like, and I was afraid, to be honest, to disclose to anybody that I was pregnant because I thought they will not give me the TA position. I think it was a month before I actually gave birth that I actually told my mentor that, you know, I'm pregnant, so I might need some help substituting classes for me when I actually go into delivery and stuff. So again, that whole situation with COVID and pregnancy, I remember going through experiences as, you know, at Walmart, the cashier saw me and she was like, "Oh, you have a COVID baby." And I looked at her, honestly, I don't know if it was hormones or something. I started crying and I told her, "No, it's not a COVID baby." And, you know, I also felt like kind of guilty because the way she said it with her voice was like, you know, people are dying, but you're having a baby. So it's all a lot of those different experiences. Again, with TA-ship, when I kind of wanted to prepare myself to know what will happen in case something goes wrong with my delivery, whether I do have some kind of security. And again, as a part-time faculty, international student at IUP at my university, I was told we don't have any opportunity for sick leave or maternity leave whatsoever. When I emailed the HR department, and honestly, at that time, I didn't even want to tell them that I'm pregnant. I just hypothetically wrote, in case, you know, as an instructor, I get sick with COVID, what happens? And they, like, I have that language here as well. They just told me in one line, since you're a TA, you're not qualified for any sick days. So that made me also wonder, like, okay, so what am I going to do when I have to deliver this baby? Thankfully for me, everything happened really well. And I'm so blessed that it happened that way. Because he was born on November 19th, which was right before Thanksgiving break. So I had that break, a week break, to actually, you know, try to breastfeed and do all of that. But also I had this supportive mentor who was able, he was always very supportive, but he was saying, like, if you need me to sub for you, of course I will do it. But, you know, again, I think it's because he is a father himself to 3 kids. So I think he understands. So I was lucky that I have him. But I think, you know, in any other situation, I don't think I would be even able to disclose to somebody who doesn't know what it is to have kids. So definitely that was kind of like experiences that I had during these times that definitely, some of them really struck me. Some of them I did feel like a privileged person, but definitely a lot of them I felt like a marginalized. And I think since I'm an international student, things like, you know, even insurance, there is a lot of things that goes into that. They ask you for different proofs that some documents I cannot even provide because I'm not a citizen. So, you know, or I will never forget how we went to Ukraine because we had to switch from Fulbright sponsored visa to a student visa. And the question that I was asked at the embassy was, how did you pay for the delivery? And I ultimately said, how is that relate to you issuing me a student visa? Like, I don't see any relation. Like, first of all, of course, I was on Fulbright scholarship and I had the insurance from Fulbright, so it's paid for it. But it definitely was not the place to ask me those questions at the embassy when I applied for a new visa. So, you know, there is a lot of things that go into it. But from the point of view of a graduate student, especially at where I see myself at IUP, there is really none that kind of support that we can have, unless it's like one-on-one personal support, but nothing that is more structured. Unfortunately, we don't have any of the clubs or anything, like Adina was saying, maybe you can have like, some kind of a community. I do have friends who have kids because, now at the age that my daughter is a toddler, we have play dates and stuff like that. But there is nothing really more university-wide, nothing really that comes from the administration that would support mothers. It's really just something on personal one-to-one level.
So with that said, you mentioned, of course, the professors who are offered to sub for some of your classes. Were there other things that you would want either senior faculty to be aware of that were helpful to you, or what other students maybe could do to be helpful to those that are pregnant or in a child caring position?
Yeah, something that even right now I came across, I'm right now actually applying to work in the writing center. And some of the things that I asked my supervisor at the writing center is that maybe I could have a different shifts for work. So, some of the shifts I cannot make because honestly, whatever I would get paid at that writing center is like 2 times less than I would have to pay for the daycare for my son. So I would definitely rather stay with him at home and then work when my husband can be at home. So, flexible, I would guess work shifts would be something definitely for graduate students who are graduate assistants or teacher associates. In terms of coursework, definitely, something like deadlines for those, extended deadlines for those who are in coursework and are parents as well. In terms of like HR, I feel that there is so much that has to be changed. Not even accepting a sick leave for TA, not even mentioning the maternity leave is something that I still not, and whenever I tell my friends in Ukraine who have 3 years of maternity leave, that I didn't get any, they're all very shocked, even though I do think that 3 years is a bit too much, but I would definitely be fine with a year. So I think, there's a lot that can be done. And I feel like maybe on one hand, I think maybe we are not vocal enough. Maybe we need to have that group community that would actually advocate for themselves with the help of those, faculty members that are allies. So, myself, I was thinking about actually some kind of a child service, and I envision it as part of kind of like what YMCA does as a child watch in terms of, having kind of like a child service on campus where student parents can go and drop their kids for maybe that 2 hours when they have a course that they need to attend. And then after 2 hours, they pick up their kid, or, they have a meeting to attend. So again, they will drop for that just an hour or two, just like short-term child watch services. And I actually even made a whole financial plan for that because it was part of one of the classes and kind of like a business plan that I created. I did pitch it to our president at university, but of course it never got anywhere further. He told me, I will contact you and we'll have a conversation. It's been 2 years since he told me that, and nothing really happens. But it's funny how there are so many other issues going on in terms of retrenchment. We had a huge retrenchment at IUP. So I feel like all of these problems in terms of leaves, maternity leaves, student parents on campus, they're like secondary or even tertiary because people don't really want to think about those. They want to see, bigger picture, and they don't really think about those other populations that are still on campus, but maybe not that visible.
So we're now moving into, thank you, of course, Aksana. We're moving into the section where we'd really welcome any and all questions and comments from those of you who are with us today. And I thought maybe we could start by letting Barrett, who I mentioned at the very top of the hour, she was instrumental in planning today's talk in terms of planning speakers and who would be part of the conversation. And so I wanted to give her a chance. She's in between meetings, so it'll be very quick, but if Barrett would like to join us for a second, please let us know what you do and how SWS can help graduate students.
Hi everyone, I'm Barrett Katuna, the Executive Officer of SWS. I'm sorry I couldn't come earlier, but there's a lot going on today with meetings, and I just hopped out of an investment committee meeting, and we have our feminist support group call coming up at 2:00 Eastern time. So that's a great segue into one of the ways that we support our members with supportive conversations. There's never an agenda. It's completely open. So we initially started that conversation in the midst of COVID, and then we've expanded it to talk about parenting information, that resources that we share, information for graduate students, information for people who are on the job market, so all sorts of resources. So Katie just asked if you need to be members. You don't need to be a member to join. I would just say, I'll put my email address in here. Or can I? Yeah, I could do it to all attendees, swseo.barrettcatuna. But everyone's welcome, and we'd love to have more people join us. We typically have anywhere between 10 to 20 people, so the conversation is always really great. So thanks so much for doing this, Katie, and thank you. We're proud to sponsor this with IAMAS.
Absolutely. And so we had talked many times about the importance of community and having, when it comes to self-advocating, sometimes it can really be hard when you feel like you're the only person experiencing something, but when you feel like there's others that are invested in what you're advocating for, it can be a little bit easier to share your struggles and ask for change and those sorts of things. So it sounds like that would be a great place to get some of that support.
Definitely. And I'll put the link in here.
Great.
So, yep.
So one of the things, and this may, as we're waiting for other people to post questions and comments and that sort of thing, what struck me, and Summer and I had talked a little bit while we were planning this, that we would love to do a follow-up. We already have one follow-up. This is actually a two-part series, but a third, not necessarily linked, but related topic being Title IX. And the issues of legality that are coming up, particularly with some of the stuff Aksana had mentioned. I am certainly not a Title IX expert or can add a lot to that, but I was wondering if those of you who perhaps have more experience, talk a little bit about what pregnant women and pregnant people can expect in terms of support, and where are some of the lines that you see being crossed that, again, when Annie mentioned the squeaky wheel, maybe folks aren't necessarily prepared to go, toe to toe on some of these issues. But I think, as a brief overview, what are some of the protections that legal systems in the US and in other countries?
So Katie, I didn't hear that full question. I'm not sure if it's just my internet or.
So I was talking a little bit about, so some of the issues that are coming up seem, frankly, I'm surprised that it's legal, and we certainly know that not everything that happens is necessarily. But I was wondering if any of you here have a little bit of experience addressing what rights pregnant people can anticipate, and kind of how to spot when people are outside of the purview of legal code. And I have a feeling that we might be kind of focusing a little too much on the US right now, but if you have ideas, experience outside the US, that might be a place to think as well.
I think I could speak a little bit to some of the legal pieces. Having been pregnant in graduate school, I was in the position of having of being part of a union, which was incredibly helpful. And I know that that's more of a rarity than it is the norm. But I ran things through my union when I felt like they weren't. I didn't feel like I was being treated fairly, and I felt like it was because of my status as being pregnant. And they dealt with a couple of issues for me. I know, Aksana, you mentioned HR. I also found that for me, going through our human resources office at the University of Washington was really helpful in terms of documenting, what I could possibly get. So an example of this is when I took my comprehensive exams. For us, it was a 2-day exam. But you could get an extension to 3 days if you met certain criteria, and pregnancy was considered to be a medically indicated event in which you would get an extra day. And I ran that through HR, and HR sent a message to my department about it. And I did that instead of going through my department specifically, because there was a little confusion, I think, in the department about what the policy was. And I wanted to make sure that I had a trail that said, yes, in fact, this is the policy, and that there wasn't going to be any shifting of that later. So going outside of the department in order to make sure that things are being done legally, I think can be really helpful, because I do think that schools generally, the HR departments are knowledgeable about what the policies are, and they want to make sure that the departments are falling in line in terms of following the correct protocol.
Interesting in terms of the unions, and yes, that was something, is a rarity. And so then kind of how to navigate when you're not in that situation. But certainly, one of the things that we talked about in sort of the planning of this was that sometimes you have policies in place, but the culture of the university doesn't really permit access to those. So I know with IAMAS, we have an award called the MoMA Award, which is Making Opportunities for Mothers in Academia. We'll be presenting our second annual award this September as part of our annual conference. And basically what that award asks is, what programs are you spearheading or part of developing on your own campuses that helps keep women in academia, basically, and through the tenure process, so it's graduate students on, and it's certainly not limited to those in the United States, it's around the world. And so it's been amazing hearing some of the work that's being done, but of course that hearing what work is being done highlights what's not already part and parcel of, the college environment. But one of the questions when Nicole Welly and I were developing this program was that you can have the best policies around that are, well-designed, take into consideration, needs and the voices of those being impacted by the policy and all those things. But if it's not really considered okay culturally, then what do you do? So how do you change some of the cultural norms on a campus? And what have you seen that has been useful in terms of impacting progressive change? And that's for anybody who would like to chime in.
I'll say, I think the academic life is a little particular if you're involved with like a teaching assistantship or you are teaching a class, right? So I find that our university made an improvement when we stopped giving kind of these delineated blocks of time and said, if it was going to interrupt a semester where you would be either a teaching assistant or teaching your own class as the instructor, you really had to have what they call active service modified duties, because it was too disruptive to expect people to go in and out of the classroom, sometimes with a maternity leave falling smack dab in the middle of a semester. So I think that there are ways in which academia needs to be a little bit more thoughtful about the oddness of some of our tasks, such as teaching. So I would just recommend that people think in terms of, it might be different with a research assistantship, but if you've got anything involving a semester or a term course, how do you really relieve that person for that whole semester or that whole quarter or that whole summer session, so that you're not kind of expecting something unreasonable to happen. And it's not good for the students either, obviously. So the universities often care about that because the students are the ones paying the bills, quote unquote, right? So I think that's one way to kind of sell some of these policies, is to look at it from that kind of consumer perspective of what's going to be the most positive for the students. I don't mean grad students, of course. I mean like the traditional undergrads are the ones most universities are concerned about keeping happy.
What about other folks? How do you, particularly if you've been on a campus that you didn't feel you could take advantage of the policies in place, or if you know of other folks, colleagues and peers that have been in that sort of situation, how do you go about sort of shifting those cultural norms, in your opinion?
One of the things that was happening at the University of Washington before I left was that when we were doing graduate recruitment, we had a panel on graduate student life. And I'll talk about one of the problems of this panel, but the great thing about it was that there was always a graduate student parent on the panel. And that was a shift during the time I was there. There were really not graduate students that they could pull into these panels. I think someone on the staff made the decision that it was really important that graduate students coming in, coming from a variety of backgrounds, had a variety of experiences from graduate students talking that they could go to. And I do think that that changed the culture a little bit, particularly as there were more parents who could speak to their experience as graduate student parents. I think that people were coming into the program that had children who might have previously passed on the program. So I think that that's one of them. I say that there was a problem with this only to say the graduate student parents I saw get pulled in on these graduate student life panels, but were rarely pulled in on these research panels, right? Like, tell us about your research. So I think that there's a benefit to having those voices, but I think that we have to be careful about understanding that this person is a parent and they're also a researcher, and their research matters too. So bringing them into other panels as well.
So one of the folks in our audience asked us, those of us who come in with children often feel restricted to advocate because the general consensus is that we knew what we were signing up for. So how do we navigate that pushback?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think for me, the biggest kind of internal acceptance of that was something that I had to also kind of go through, because yes, on the one hand, this is something that, you got yourself into, but also, there might be people on campus that were also in your situation. So maybe talking to somebody, even if you experience something, some kind of, and in my situation, yes, there was this situation with my other classmate where, again, there was no policies in place where something like that happened, that, one student cannot be in the same kind of space with children. So again, we had to find kind of a way to negotiate that. And I think for me, honestly, I had to kind of accept it myself that yes, it is something that I chose to be a mother, but also, I am part of this academic community as well. And I'm just as good as other students who might not have kids. I think internally actually accepting that and then being able to advocate for yourself, even when you have that pushback, is a big thing. I recently came, I was thinking while we were talking about how our university actually has all of these different departments with, like commissioned on diversity, equity, inclusion. But there is not really a conversation where in that mother student parents actually fall within that, diversity, inclusion, equity. I remember so many surveys being sent to undergrad students, to grad students, but I honestly don't remember a question in those surveys about student population, any question regarding your status, parental status, either you're a parent or not. So, I think we definitely should start with those things, because how do we even know that those students exist unless we hear from them? And I was when I was still in my coursework, I was an assistant to a professor, and we had this undergraduate student. She was a mother of 3 kids, and I was asking her, actually, I was like, so do you report this to somebody? Like, does your mentor or advisor know? She said that, at the beginning, she was not even comfortable sharing that stuff because she thought that she would be marginalized as a student, and she didn't want, to have that kind of attitude and that kind of, I don't know, layaway that she had to have extension, stuff like that. So I don't know. I feel like, that pushback will be probably always there, but you have to kind of go through internally and then try to kind of find your own voice and fight with that, I guess.
And Adina, did you want to join in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that we can expand our idea of who the allies would be for this conversation when we include the broader scope of kind of caretaking responsibilities. And sadly, but perhaps ultimately positively, I think COVID has really pointed out that even for our very healthy, child-free colleagues, health and disability can impact your lives unexpectedly. And I think there are more faculty who are in that sandwich generation, or even faculty who are child-free, but now they have to care for a sick or injured spouse or a disabled parent. So I think that's another way to broaden it out and to kind of highlight that, yes, for many of us, becoming a parent is a choice, but these unexpected health issues and need for leave and support are really a broader issue in our workspaces and in academia in particular. So I'm hopeful that for a lot of folks who have felt invincible, that maybe some of the awareness of what's gone on the last year and a half will expand our conversations to kind of support for caretakers or support for folks who are dealing with unexpected illnesses, disabilities, injuries, and kind of broaden it to that level of health status, caretaking status as part of our DEI efforts.
I think too, I'm seeing a message from Nisha and Catherine, both of parents who are coming into graduate schools. And the one thing I will say is that graduate students, as they're being recruited into, I know someone said there that a prestigious program, it is the one time when you actually feel like you have the least amount of power and you actually have the most amount of power. So I think a lot of us at least, struggle with this imposter syndrome. I can't believe they accepted me. Like, they don't actually know me. Once they get to know me, they'll regret this decision, right? And that's just not the case. And I've seen programs really try to recruit hard. Once they have accepted you, they really want you to come. And so use that to your advantage. I think that's the time that you start saying, hey, I noticed you don't have a policy around this. Is it possible to develop X, Y, or Z? And it feels odd and uncomfortable, I think, because we struggle with that imposter syndrome. But it is essentially the most power that you will have as a graduate student is before you ever enter graduate school, and you're going back and forth. At least at some programs, that's true. But it is possible, I think, for folks outside who are coming in to really do a lot of that advocacy early on and just say, hey, I need this in order to be there. And that's actually, you are in a position of power at that particular point.
And there was another thing that had come up when we were talking about this session, was the idea of transparency and how some schools are doing a great job, of course, of saying, look, this is how we can support you. These are the policies we have in place. But the discomfort, as has come up many times throughout this past conversation, of then asking or feeling the need to ask what the school can provide because of that squeaky wheel thing, and that sort of sense of discomfort of asking for something that maybe somebody else doesn't need. And so what, for those who maybe are not yet in graduate school and might be listening to this, and for those that might be looking further into the graduate school process, who might be looking for a faculty position, what are some of the things that you think are important to look for in terms of programs that are offered or supports that are in place that, again, how do we what are some questions to ask or some ways to gauge if those policies are being utilized and being helpful in the way that they were intended based on those kind of cultural norms of the university? So talking, through like when you are not yet part of the university, what might you want to look for?
I can start us off. I think definitely inquiring about those child services on campus, whether, how long is the wait list, or if they have some free spots. I would also definitely talk to the program director, even asking whether they have student parents in the program, and maybe they can get you in touch with those people. So then you can actually talk to somebody who went through this program while having kids or being pregnant, because I think that would tell you a lot, even about like the load of courses, the coursework, how much time they needed to, and whether they were able to maybe write and stuff like that. Something that really helped me was, since now I am in the dissertation writing stage, I actually had an opportunity to talk to somebody who was also at the same stage writing their dissertation, having a toddler and an infant at the same time. How did they manage that writing time, because you still need to make some progress on your dissertation. And my program director was able to put me in touch with that person, and we became friends on Facebook. So, when I had some kind of struggle, I would ask for an advice, like, what worked for you? Maybe can you give me some advice? Maybe I should get up earlier and just have that 1 hour for writing and stuff like that. Something that I also feel like is important is that, if you are a graduate student and you know that you will be moving to a different state, whether you will be able to find that relative or some kind of help, because you're not in your, your hometown or something. For international student like myself, we are actually so far away from any family. We're going into a completely new place with a different language and stuff like that. So I think it's super hard. So that's why, for me, it was definitely helpful that I had a very supportive spouse. But for those who are single mothers, you actually would probably have to find like maybe somebody who went through your program and can help you with that. So I would definitely, even during like that thinking process, whether you want to apply to the school, I would definitely email the program director and ask those specific questions about, child services, how much do they cost, whether budget wise you will be able to meet those financial expenses. Then again, putting in touch with somebody who went through this program, or right now is in the program with children. Maybe you can kind of talk through if you can babysit, during the time that you don't have to do your coursework, and then that person could help you out. So things like that. I think as long as you can be vocal about it, and being comfortable to actually say that you are a parent or you're expecting, then probably they would help you out. If not, then maybe it's not a good program for you, and you should move on and try to find something different. Again, the same with like financial support. If it's a grad school, how much money they will give you as a scholarship or something, and then how much you have left for any other things. So I think those things are important, definitely, when you think about moving to a different state for grad school or anything like that.
So the last question that I have, if there are no other questions from those who are joining us today, is that we have talked at IAMAS anyway about some of the ways that policies that say a parental leave policy that is geared for fathers and for mothers may not address the specific needs that mothers face. And it could be some of the health outcomes that you had mentioned, Adina. But I think in many, many cases, the birth-giving mother or mother in general, for social reasons and for biological reasons, have a heavier load, particularly during those early months when you're nursing and doing those sorts of things, if that's been part of the picture for you. So how do we navigate some of that when universities are prone to develop policies that do not address mothers specifically. Do you think that we should have policies that call out those differences? I know that that can be problematic. How do you feel we can navigate some of those trickier issues when it comes to, again, supports that are in place, but may not be targeting the specific needs that need to be addressed?
I would say it is important to recognize kind of the health aspect of it, right? That that there's the caretaking aspect, but then there's also the health, and by health, the mental health, the physical health, as well as the sleep deprivation side of it, right? So I think when I've heard critiques about, let's call it parental leave policies for the non-pregnant partner, they often make that person kind of sign a statement that says, if I'm taking this leave, I am the primary caregiver of this, newborn or newly adopted baby or child. I understand the spirit of that type of policy, but I think that perhaps that's where we need to see kind of a two-prong approach, where there is the caretaking for the leave for the person who is doing the caretaking, but I think we just need a bigger understanding of the health issues that the pregnant person may be facing leading up to the delivery and following the delivery, and to kind of split those two policies apart, so that one is more kind of a health medical leave and one is more perhaps of a caretaking leave. And right now, almost everybody I see in every industry, including academia, combines the two. And I think that is a mistake. I think that is kind of not recognizing some of the physiological and mental health issues that might be very particular versus the caregiving issues. So that's what I would advocate for.
And then I'm just going to, so usually when we end our sessions, oh wait, there might be, so how would this conversation be different for Black mothers, especially given the disparity in motherhood mortality rates, was one of the questions that came into the Q&A. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch that one earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely has been a spotlight in my particular current research area. And the data is pretty stark. And so it's always that kind of like, you don't want to stigmatize or assume somebody's going to have a particular health outcome because of who they are and how unfortunately our medical system has historically been failing some of our populations more seriously than others. So I would say it's important to recognize and just kind of assume that there are these healthcare and health outcome disparities, and to always make sure that your policies and your normative language around these policies don't blame the patient or the parent. Assume that they may need more support, and make it as comfortable as possible for them to get that additional support. And yeah, there's particular work going on to kind of address these different maternal health disparities that I think involves a lot of hospital policies changing and a lot of doctor-patient or practitioner-patient interactions. We know that certain types of pregnant people are unfortunately less likely to be believed when they are expressing health concerns, and so that definitely needs to be remedied at the medical care level. So I would just say, for those of us who are making policies or in senior positions, to really make it as comfortable as possible for grad students, for junior faculty members, for fellows to kind of be honest and real and vulnerable and let us know what they need. Because that kind of gets to the heart of what you all were talking about, that we kind of have this assumption that we're supposed to be these invincible academic performers. And so I think kind of bringing the humanity back to that. But yeah, I would put the onus on the healthcare disparities. I see that as being something that our healthcare system, the way we train doctors, nurses, really needs to change in terms of how women are receiving different levels of treatment and care.
I think there's also a second piece to this too, right? When students of color are having to advocate for themselves within these environments that were built for, white folks primarily anyway. And so this is like an added layer to that. And so I think that when we, I'm not an advocate of saying like, oh, we need graduate students to advocate for themselves for all of these different policies to change or point out when there's a problem with the policies. I think schools need to become really, really clear, and departments need to become really, really clear that they're making a commitment to changing their policies by pulling everyone in around the table, having that be facilitated, and having a conversation about what needs to change. So it doesn't lie on the shoulders of graduate students who may not feel comfortable coming forward when problems arise, right? It's not like, oh, you will catch it eventually, right? And we're not ready for you, but it's like, we're ready for you. We've thought through the diverse experiences our students are coming in with, and we are creating policies that incorporate that. Not that there won't be any moments where these policies aren't working, but at least taking that initial step to say, part of being an inclusive environment is really combing through our policies, getting everyone at the table, figuring out what's working and figuring out what's not, so that people don't have to do so much self-advocating later.
Well, thank you. So as I think that wraps up the questions from other folks, we tend to end our sessions with one last question. We believe that in activist scholarship at IAMAS, and I believe that SWS is very much aligned with us on that. So what are some action steps? Like one relatively easy, not one of those, we just need to change the system. What are some of the tangible, real things, one or two ideas that you have of how to kind of dig away at this much larger problem that we've been talking about?
Well, I guess I'll take it from the tenured faculty member perspective, that if you are in a position of power, to really take the lead in making sure that, for example, the way that you all are recruiting and retaining grad students or recruiting and retaining junior faculty is explicitly it's explicitly taking into account that those folks may be pregnant, they may be giving birth, they may be navigating childcare. So kind of like, instead of that being the exception or kind of an odd thing to think about, that needs to be kind of a normalized part of how you are either educating or mentoring a whole human being as a student or a colleague at your institution. So I would just encourage those of us who are at that level where we can try to push for policy changes. And again, just don't take for granted that you have power in kind of setting a tone and pushing back when your grad students or your junior colleagues may not feel that they are able to do so. So I would advocate for that.
Okay, so I guess that's me next. I think that from my standpoint and all those experiences I had as a graduate student and international student, as a mother, I think one action step that I wish I have done, but I didn't, is to actually document all of those things that happened. Some of those text messages, if you received some, maybe the language from, HR, the program director, because one thing you can do is to kind of understand it to yourself. Okay, this is what it means to me. You can take it a step further. You can build your scholarship based on that. You can take it as part of your research. And I actually think that if I will have enough courage, I will write about that whole Fulbright experience. I feel like I'm not in the position right now where I'm still an international student on an F visa, where I'm not in that status where I can actually bring it forward and publish about it, but one day, hopefully I will. I think it's important to kind of first engage in a reflexive practice where, you can think about those things, you can hopefully find some solutions, but also if you can build your scholarship based on that, because it might be something that is very dear to you, and you hopefully, with your scholarship, you can maybe change something. I think it's also really important to, document those things, because they can become very helpful
Yeah, I would echo what everyone else said. I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about is as I mentioned earlier, I'm also a birth doula. And so for me personally, providing support I do like a 50% off for all graduate and undergraduate students. But being able to provide that financial assistance, then still offer my doula services to people who are students and who are oftentimes considered privileged, and so other folks might not have graduate students on their radars in terms of offering those kinds of services. That's one of the things that I've been doing. The other thing is talking about in our scholarship. I talk about in my WIC scholarship that I came to the WIC program because I was a recipient of WIC, because I was pregnant, because I had a child. And I do think that when you're in a position to be able to talk about how your identities have influenced your work, and you're able to say, yes, I have children, that's really powerful for the folks who are coming through as well, to be able to acknowledge that, like, yeah, you can actually have children and you can still be an active scholar. And those two things can actually go together.
And that is a lovely note to end on, Annie, as we talk about making the invisible visible. I think we oftentimes at IAMAS definitely advocate that people who are in a position where they can do so say, I am a mother and I am doing this work, because it also it alerts those around you that it is possible, but it's also for the people that are coming up behind you, that they know that you're somebody that they can talk to and look to, hopefully for mentorship and guidance and some support. So for everybody that is with us right now, I hope that you have found support in what we've been talking about. Certainly there are many Facebook groups that you can join that offer a lot of support as well, but SWS and IAMAS are both active on Facebook and Twitter, and I encourage you to follow us there. And if you have any questions that you'd like to reach out, Barrett's email is in the chat box, and my email is at iamas.com. You can find it pretty much anywhere online, I believe. But with that, I want to thank everybody who is here today. And thank you, of course, to Annie, Aksana, Adina, and Summer for all their thoughts and input. It's been terrific planning with you all, and I hope everybody here has enjoyed hearing from you as much as I have. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really wonderful
Thank you. Bye-bye.
conversation.